Hi folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report. In one of our reports, we talked about selecting a spinning reel. Well, let's go to another step now. Let's talk about what makes different rods work well in one way and maybe not well in another way. So when you're selecting a spinning rod, number one, you have to decide how big and how big or how light a rod you want to use. If you're out fishing for really big fish, or if you're fishing with heavy lures and weights, or if you're trolling, or there's so many aspects will determine how big that rod needs to be to handle the tackle. But if you can get by with lighter rods and line and reels, there's a huge benefit, I think, in the experience, because the lighter rod will allow you to feel the fish more. It'll allow you to enjoy the fight, the battle, whatever you want to call it, that takes place once you hook the fish and then finally get to bring it in. The other thing is the construction of that rod is really critical. Graphite makes up most of the spinning rods today, but some are still made of fiberglass. The difference is graphite is more sensitive. You can feel the strikes better with graphite, but also it has more power. You can take any kind of rod, and if you compare the same length and weight of rod made of graphite and fiberglass, the graphite will give you a better chance of casting further because there's more power in the rod itself. And the other thing that I think is really critical to remember is where that power is going to be. That's why you see rods that have all different kind of actions labeled on the rod, whether it's a fast tip or a slow tip, and fiberglass is going to be slower. There are advantages to fiberglass. It tends to be stronger. It's not as brittle. So if you're not as careful with the tackle, fiberglass is tougher. It will withstand more abuse. The second thing is because of its slow action. In other words, it bends all the way from the tip down to the butt in some cases. It allows you to use certain tackle more efficiently. And let me explain what I mean. And you can do the same thing with graphite depending on the action you select. But if you select a really fast tip, it's going to allow you to cast really well because it's going to snap that line out. It's also going to give you more power when you set the hook. But depending on the lures that you're using, the type of technique you're using will determine whether you want that power. For example, if you're using a Senko worm, the worm is motionless. You need more power to set the hook. If you're using some kind of a crankbait or even a spinnerbait, bringing it back, you don't need near as much power. You want the rod to bend, and also, if the rod has too much power in the tip, it will tend to allow the fish to get the hook out easier because it won't give with the battle. Where if there's more flex in the tip, if you're using like a spinnerbait or a crankbait, well, it tends not to pull the hook out as easily once it's embedded in the fish's mouth. There's so much to think about. And really, if you get to be more than a casual fisherman, you'll have a few rods, and you probably have different rods that you might use for different kind of fishing. But the rod is a tool, and the rod that you select will either be a great tool or won't work near as well for you, depending on the instance. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report.